Right, so Will is going to be giving us a talk, Do Conspiracy Theories Damage Democratic Legitimacy? Please take it away.
Fantastic, okay. Well, so this paper is basically I took my dissertation and tried to boil it down into a paper, which made it very dense and long. And then I had to butcher it down into a presentation. So it's going to come across a little choppy. So I apologize for that in advance, but let me move forward. So justifying the coercive use of power by the state is one of the central tasks of social and political philosophy today. And one of the most exciting areas within this field is the legitimizing function of democratic deliberation. Much of the literature on democratic legitimacy focuses on the types and sources of reasons that are allowable in democratic deliberation to justify democratic outcomes. So in this presentation, I'm going to discuss conspiracy theories as a form of democratic reasoning. So conspiracy theories are regularly referred to as sort of bad for democracy, and considering that many theories of democracy require public reasons and conspiracy theories are by definition accounts of secret activities, I wonder if using conspiracy theories in democratic deliberation is damaging to political legitimacy. Here's a brief outline of what I'm going to be up to. So I'm going to argue that many conspiracy theories will be acceptable reasons in public political justification. And I'm also going to argue that there's a particular class of conspiracy theories that I'm just going to call genuine conspiracy theories contain an implicit commitment to democracy. So just to let you know how I'm going to use the word or the phrase conspiracy theory, I'm taking the particularist approach. I'm not using I'm using a non-pejorative definition. So conspiracy theories are explanations of historical events involving a small group of people acting in secret. I think I took that from Brian Keeley. I think conspiracy theories are widespread. They contain various degrees of justification. They're everywhere in daily life, and all of us are conspiracy theorists in some sense. Thanks to Charles Pigden. Now, today, deliberative democracy is the most active area in normative democratic theory. Deliberative democracy claims that democratic procedures and outcomes or outcomes are legitimate if they're produced through a process of fair, equal, and reasoned deliberation. So unlike aggregative democracy, which sees legitimacy produced through the aggregation of predetermined preferences and with maybe like a simple majority vote, the deliberative approach views the exchange of reasons as a constitutive feature of democracy and integral to its legitimacy. So at the core of deliberative democracy is this commitment to the equality and freedom of citizens, and a need for mutual respect between those citizens. Now, mutual respect also requires the avoidance of unjustified coercive power, primarily the threat or use of force, but also the use of power imbalances in deliberative venues, like limiting citizens' abilities to participate freely and equally. Oops. But there's also a significant debate among deliberative approaches as to what else mutual respect requires, and specifically over the requirements of public reasoning. If deliberative democracy sees the exchange of reasons as central to political legitimacy, then reason exchange must have certain limitations to uphold mutual respect. And a lot of this debate is framed in terms of publicity. So by some accounts, certain kinds of reasons do not belong in public deliberation because they're not properly public. If deliberative democracy requires public reasons, and conspiracy theories by definition are involving secret activities, there's likely to be some conceptual conflict there. So I'm going to be looking at some of the requirements of venue publicity and content publicity, which includes shared, accessible, and morally reasonable reasons in relation to conspiracy theories. So Amy Gutman and Dennis Thompson claim that a politically justifying reason should be public in two ways: its venue and its content. So venue publicity requires reasons to be offered in some public forum and available to be heard by others. So content publicity separately refers to the ability for reasons to be shared or at least accepted by a wide audience. So I'm going to start with venue publicity. So the secrecy component to conspiracy theories bears directly on these two requirements. So Reike points out that we might make a distinction between public and non-public conspiracies and public and non-public sources of information about conspiracies. And this is an important distinction for conspiracies within deliberative theories, because political conspiracies are bad for democratic legitimacy insofar as they fail the requirement of venue publicity. So that's conspiracies, not conspiracy theories, right? Those conspiracies are bad for democracy. Individuals reasoning within the bounds of their own mind, or political representatives deliberating behind closed doors, is just, it's not acceptable without some kind of accountability requirement. So reasons have to be offered to others in a communicative act. But some conspiracy theories and theorists may be beneficial to society. Cody is makes the point that political conspiracies are a class of conspiracy that violate these norms of openness and venue publicity necessary for democracy. Conspiracy theorists perform a necessary democratic function because average citizens generally outsource our vigilance to specialists like investigatory journalists to make public these venue private conspiracies. Reicha also defines a category of political conspiracies that he calls total conspiracy theories that point out that some political conspiracies claim that, quote, conspiring groups are so secret people don't even know they exist. But theorizing about such a group involves the kind of reasoning that's problematic for deliberative democracy, since the source of that information is non-public, right? Nobody knows about it. But if the theory is being presented, right, if the theory is being presented publicly as a reason for political decision-making, but the source of the information is non-public, then this violates the public reason requirement in the second sense of content publicity. Okay, so the content of reasons may be considered public, properly public in two ways, either shared reasons or accessible reasons. Now, shared reasons are reasons that other people also have. Accessible reasons are reasons that others might not hold as reasons, currently, but they can at least understand it or accept it as a reason, okay? But in either case, content publicity requires that reasons, they cannot appeal to special knowledge like secular or religious revelation, and they have to be embraced by all. So conspiracy theories are problematic for shared reasons, a shared reasons requirement view, because these are accounts that run counter to the public official explanation of the event, right? This means some conspiracy theories are constituted by non-shared reasons, since those reasons are rejected by those who have accepted this official story. However, the shared reasons requirement does not necessarily exclude all conspiracy theories. Because even if a conspiracy theory involves a secret plot, that doesn't necessarily mean the theory is not widely accepted. I mean, Watergate involved a secret plot, but that's, I think, a widely accepted explanation of events. Additionally, there's an epistemic drawback to the shared reasons approach, in that it doesn't seem to really matter whether or not the shared reasons are true, only that they're shared. So if a society widely believes that Elvis is still alive, then those reasons could be used in public debate. So there's this epistemic drawback as well. Now, the accessibility requirement states that reasons be acceptable as reasons by other people. This is more inclusive of divergent reasons than the shared view, but it's also been employed by many as a way to remove controversial reasons from public debate, most notably religious reasons. So religious reasons have been accused of being inaccessible, like Abner Green calls them a secret box, because only the religious believer has access to the information. And lacking direct access, the rest of the public has to take the truth of that kind of evidence on the basis of testimony. It's not acceptable. Now, conspiracy theories may be publicly inaccessible in two ways, similar to religious reasons: the secret plot component and in their evaluative standards. So if a conspiracy theory posits like a secret plot or a secret group, this raises the question of how the conspiracy theorists manage to source their information. Some conspiracy theorists use public information, but others use information from actors who are taking on like a holy kind of priestly role, interpreting or incorporating information, right? Like a QAnon shaman or QAnon drops. Conspiracy theories may also rely on non-doxastic sources like faith or personal feelings of distrust. Now, Christopher Everly argues that religious beliefs are not any more inaccessible than scientific knowledge, which is widely considered accessible in deliberative approaches. So he uses this insight to infer that the accessibility requirement must really be about in-principle accessibility rather than actual accessibility, since scientific principles are not widely understood by the general population. So, both the scientist and the religious person develop certain skills to obtain understanding. And if one is open to the religious experience and has the necessary prerequisite background, anyone in principle could have access to the same religious experience. And I'll just add on top of that that religious conversion is usually a lot easier and cheaper than higher ed, and also comes with a lot less debt, at least monetarily. So some conspiracy theories may well fall into this category of secret box thinking that could still be in principle accessible, assuming the information is not obtained through non-normal processes like telepathy, but through the normal use of regular human capabilities. However, even if secret box conspiracy theories are in principle accessible, these theories may demonstrate another problem for accessibility, which is the evaluative standards that they use. So reasons are accessible insofar as they offer a justification based on common evaluative standards. Inaccessible reasons are that way because they're created through epistemic practices that are just not widely shared. So this is one of the central claims against conspiracy theories, that they don't conform to common evaluative standards, like Son says they're vice thinking. Keeley points out that some conspiracy theories think evidence against the theory could be used as evidence for the theory. Sunstein calls these theories self-sealing, right, or vice, crippled epistemologies. So several philosophers have nonetheless argued to drop the accessibility requirement because first, we can see the argument as justified to the person who's offering it, even if we reject their epistemic standards. We can see that that by their standards, they are holding a rational belief, even by our standards or not. Second, mutual respect the argument goes, mutual respect only requires reasons to be given honestly, because those reasons are believed by the speaker to be the best ones available. And lastly, I think this one's really important, standards of rationality and evidence vary widely from culture to culture. And so radical Democrats like Iris Young, Selah Ben-Habib, Nancy Fraser, they argue that any attempt to limit public reasoning to some kind of proper vocabulary is inherently privileging the status quo and protects existing power structures. Now, and forgive me for butchering this, so Sibik and Hardosh wrote a paper examining conspiracy theories and political legitimacy directly. It's the only one I came across where those two connections were made. Now, they argue that we can't define bad conspiracies by their epistemic flaws because some conspiracy theories turn out to be true. So they end up using a different approach. They define bad conspiracy theories as ones that are morally unreasonable, and morally unreasonable is defined as reasons that denigrate the freedom and equality of all citizens. For example, they argue that a Jewish global banking conspiracy is an unreasonable conspiracy theory because the theory is quote, designed to fuel anti-Semitic feelings, clearly endangering the mutual respect, freedom, and equality of citizens that stand behind contemporary liberal societies. However, and this is just a general drawback to the deliberative approach, including what Sibik and Hardosh are doing, that in calling for equality and mutual respect, the deliberative Democrat cannot demand that all citizens accept the same view of what equality requires. So this is precisely the whole point of deliberative democracy. We can't force another to accept certain reasons. The reasons, the force of the reasons have to do that work. So thick, what's sometimes referred to as thick conceptions of equality involve an imposition of certain liberal moral values, which deliberative democracy cannot rightly impose without violating its own basic guidelines. So Sibik and Hardosh are I think, guilty of smuggling in moral considerations that ought rather to be the subject of democratic debate rather than imposed as pre-deliberative requirements. So just to be clear, an anti-Jewish conspiracy theorist holds an inequitous, an immoral worldview, but they're not excluded from offering reasons unless those reasons deny political equality to other citizens. So Civic and Hardosh, they're accusing the inequitous conspiracy theorists of offering theories which degrade social equality, but not necessarily political equality. I mean, certainly some of them do deny political equality, right? If the conspiracy theorist is claiming that Jewish people should not be allowed to vote or hold political office, then those reasons are fairly deemed, right, morally unreasonable. And from any theory of deliberative democracy, that's not going to work. But if the inequitous theory simply has negative effects on social equality, and you know, so those are indirect on political equality, that view of social equality still needs to be determined through deliberation rather than imposed. Otherwise, it can be reasonably rejected. So it may be that placing equality and freedom at the center of a deliberative approach ultimately leads to either some level of oppression by the imposition of one moral view over another, making the theory self-defeating, or it offers a conception of equality that is just so thin that it fails to result in equal outcomes, right? So partially for this reason, some deliberative Democrats have turned towards epistemic considerations for democratic legitimacy. So epistemic democracy shares a view that democracy has epistemic benefits that are at least as good, if not much better, than any other political system, and these epistemic benefits justify democratic decision-making. So Joshua Cohen, who claims coined this term, epistemic democracy, claims there's three features of it. So one is an independent standard for correctness. The second is a cognitive account of deliberation as belief expression rather than preference expression. And lastly, it's got to be a process of reason exchange and responsiveness. So epistemic instrumentalism, which is one form of epistemic democracy, is going to argue that democracy is legitimate because deliberation produces true, correct, or just outcomes based on some independent standard for correctness. Now, that might seem naive to think that large groups, democracy can create correct answers, especially looking at our democracy, especially in the US now. But actually recent work on the Condorcet jury theorem shows that maybe this is not wholly misplaced trust. So the Condorcet jury theorem says that basically, I'm really abbreviating this, the larger the group, the more likely it is to reach correct outcomes. It's better at problem solving, the larger the group gets. And another view, similar view is the diversity trumps ability theorem, which says cognitive diversity of groups can lead to overall better decision-making than small groups of experts. So one person might be better than another at solving problems, but when you diversify the group, it actually gets much more effective at problem solving. So a lot of epistemic theories use these sort of statistical quirks to found their epistemic instrumental view of democracy. So conspiracy theories pose a challenge to these instrumental epistemic accounts insofar as some conspiracy theories contain misinformation or utilize epistemic practices that lead to incorrect outcomes. Right? Kassam makes this claim that although some conspiracy theories are true, most are false. So we should consider them all reliably obstructive methods of inquiry, and we ought to ignore them outright. Now, John Stuart Mill's epistemic conception of democracy says that silencing an apparently false opinion robs more from society than from the person whose belief is being silenced. If the apparently false opinion turns out to be right, then society is deprived of truth. If the false opinion is truly false, then society loses this opportunity to sharpen their collective deliberative process. Now, another challenge to epistemic democracy comes again from reasonable pluralism. So who sets the independent standard of correctness, right? When we say that a theory comes to correct answers, well, who's defining these correct answers, right? So some views like Cohen's or David Estlund or Bo Rothstein posit an independent standard based on like justice or human capabilities. But again, these moral concepts, if citizens reasonably disagree about that standard, they can reasonably reject it. So I was going to talk about some other epistemic approaches, especially because my next part is based on the Peircean epistemic approach to democracy. But I'm going to skip over that and just highlight that two really of the main problems that conspiracy theories pose to epistemic approaches are the degradation of the cognitive environment, and this degradation of the cognitive environment that democracy requires to be epistemically functional, and this problem of iniquitous conspiracy theories, which are being included in deliberation for epistemic reason, like what Mill is offering. So, so far what I've argued is that shareability, accessibility, and moral unreasonableness requirements do not exclude conspiracy theories like as such. And for reasons related to reasonable pluralism, I think these three standards ought to be rejected anyway. So next, I'm going to utilize some of the insights from this broad discussion of conspiracy theories and democratic legitimacy to argue for a class of conspiracy theories I'm going to call genuine conspiracy theories that I think contain an implicit commitment to democracy via the norms of belief. That I think these conspiracy theories are beneficial for the epistemic function of democracy and uphold moral standards of social equality in ways that other theories haven't really been able to cover. So again, a conspiracy theory is an explanation of a historical event that posits a group of actors acting in secret. However, there may be different sorts of motivations for this explanation and many degrees of commitment to the truth of these explanations. So what I'm calling a genuine conspiracy theory involves a set of truth-aiming beliefs, even if they include significant epistemic or moral flaws. In other words, just to believe P is to assert that P is true. Okay. So a genuine conspiracy theory is offered honestly if it's a belief held by the theorist, which they take to be the best or at least a possibly correct explanation of the event, and not at least mainly motivated by other non-doxastic factors. So this honesty requirement does not include non-doxastic conspiracy theories that are based on this honesty requirement does not include non-doxastic conspiracy theories based on some types of private feelings, but it doesn't exclude all emotions or cases of faith, assuming that these cases can be offered as reasons supporting the truth of the belief. So not all conspiracy theories involve belief, right? Non-doxastic conspiracy theories might be defined by feelings or faith or ambivalence, people just asking questions or following conspiracy theories for entertainment, but they're not concerned, in those cases, they're not concerned with the truth of the theory, but maybe some kind of instrumental value of like disingenuous conspiracy theories are just offered blatantly by somebody who knows that the theory is false. And they're just concerned with political or monetary functions that this conspiracy theory performs. So another issue for what I'm defining here is coming from David Cody, his definition of conspiracy theory. So he's arguing that not all conspiracy theories are even believers, but some of them might be active investigators. And it may be that the conspiracy theorist in Cody's view is more like a scientist testing out a hypothesis and not necessarily a believer. So I think this conception of conspiracy theorist as an active investigator, despite not being defined as a believer, is still committed to the same internal epistemic requirements as the believer, because holding a belief is a commitment to inquiring into the truth of that belief. So Cody's inquirers, assuming they're genuinely inquiring, also in the truth. So a genuine conspiracy theory is evidentialist in a widely inclusive sense. So evidentialism, broadly defined, is a theory that focuses on evidence as the justifying criteria of belief. And so in their sort of definitive account of evidentialism, Earl Connie and Richard Feldman describe doxastic justification as determined by the quality of the believer's evidence for the belief. So this is an internalist account of justification whereby the believer can properly be said to have evidence if they're able to mentally grasp the evidence as well as balance any counter evidence. So if so, then it can be said that they have justifying evidence, even if that justification does not constitute knowledge. So it's not necessary that all evidence is public and capable of being shared to be considered evidence. Scientific evidence is one form of public evidence, but private feelings, belief, introspection, and personal experience can also be evidence. So different forms of evidentialism can be more or less inclusive, and what I'm offering here is a really widely inclusive evidentialism. So I take it that justification depends on the believer's cognitive access to their evidence. So in other words, if they believe they have sufficient reasons. Of course, not all mental attitudes are going to count as evidence, right? Wanting something to be true, self-deception, dogmatic opinion, delusion, rationalization, displacement, these are not acceptable reasons. So to be a truth-aiming belief supported by evidence, that belief must meet the challenges of opposing reasons, argument, and evidence. This is an epistemic requirement, not a moral one, and it's based on the individual's commitment to truth-seeking. So to believe that you have the best reasons based on the evidence requires that you put that belief up for testing in public. You cannot believe that you have the best reason if you never put that reason up against other reasons and objections. So this belief requirement of reason exchange does not commit the theorist to any specific epistemic rules about rationality outside their own personal commitments to truth. So plenty of theories that may be generally viewed as irrational will make it into public deliberation, but those truth-aiming beliefs still hold the believer to certain basic epistemic standards that they accept. Right? Although this approach involves some level of idealization of citizens, it's not wholly unrealistic or disconnected from actual conspiracy theorists, right? I mean, the kinds of claims made by conspiracy theorists include demanding that people do their own research. They criticize the objectivity of media and other information sources. They demand government transparency. They create rational explanations in the face of errant data, right? So if a conspiracy theory is a set of beliefs, a genuine conspiracy theory, then following these sort of Peircean insights, these truth-aiming beliefs commit the theorist to certain social epistemic requirements that only democracy can fulfill. So Cody and Basham point out, Lee Basham points out, conspiracy theorists regularly argue in favor of democratic principles, right? But lots of conspiracy theorists may have more anti-democratic intentions. But assuming they offer genuine conspiracy theories, they're still, in my opinion, committed by virtue of holding truth-aiming beliefs to social epistemic requirements that are best provided by democracy. So access to public information, like the free exchange of information through the internet, libraries, free association, et cetera, et cetera. It's all necessary to form beliefs that one can accept as true. So under an authoritarian government, for example, like conspiracy theorists can't trust public information. They can't assume their epistemic peers are acting in their full epistemic capacities because the cognitive environment of authoritarian societies is likely to be much less or non-functional because it lacks all of this free access to information and education and whatnot. So in other words, if truth matters to you, then democracy is a system that provides the conditions in which to reach that truth. Truth is integral to genuine conspiracies, which in turn commit one to a democratic system. Or at least we could say a democratic system is justified because of its true belief-making potential. Okay, so if genuine conspiracy theories commit one to reason exchange and access to reliable information, then this implies a commitment to the equal standing of others as epistemic peers. So for reason exchange to be meaningful and fruitful for reliable belief creation, reason exchange requires a free and open political environment where citizens are treated equally and reason exchange has political protections. Democracy is at the very least a system that meets the needs of these epistemic requirements and may even be the best system, which some people have argued the only system to meet these needs. So moreover, the equality of citizens can't just be a thin procedural political equality. For meaningful reason exchange, citizens, including and especially those with whom they disagree, need to have social equality to be proper epistemic peers. So if citizens lack access to basic needs and education, et cetera, their epistemic abilities will be diminished and their ability to engage in the reason exchange required by the conspiracy theorists simply won't be satisfied. So inequitous conspiracy theories, if they're genuine, require Inequitous conspiracy theories, if genuine, require social equality of other citizens, including and especially those who the theorizer may be theorizing about. So, for example, to hold a belief that a minority group engages in some conspiratorial impropriety requires that group, giving that group an opportunity to defend themselves in a process of reason exchange. If the conspiracy theory somehow damages that group's ability to participate and debate freely and equally, then the original conspiracy theory accusation cannot be properly vetted, thus undermining its initial claim to truth. So investigating inequitous conspiracy theories will therefore require additional limitations and considerations, because if these conspiracy theories undercut the equality and freedom of citizens, this affects those citizens' abilities as epistemic peers. And if their epistemic peer status is damaged, then the conspiracy theorists can't properly inquire. And these considerations are going to have to be self-imposed. They're not imposed by a theory that that can be reasonably rejected. These are internal commitments to the epistemic peer status and therefore equal status of other citizens. And lastly, to deal with this issue of the cognitive environment of democracy, genuine conspiracy theories that undercut this cognitive environment of democracy, I think are also self-defeating. So if the theorist holds a belief that entails what like Keeley calls global skepticism, then they cannot assert the truth of that belief because they lack the social epistemic resources in which to verify their global conspiracy claims, right? If all sources of information are biased or in on the conspiracy, then there's no way to test one's belief that the entire system is rigged. There's plenty of room for healthy skepticism of public information and corporate media and governments, but global skepticism prohibits any proper believing since there's no one left to trust as epistemic peers in which to exchange reasons. Ooh, all right, so that's the end of my presentation. I hope that wasn't too broken apart.
Nope, that was great. That was really, really great. Thank you, Will. We already have one question from Daniel. It's a two-parter. One, can you please give some examples for non-Docastic conspiracy theories? Two, evidentialism is just one theory of epistemic justification among others. Are you aware of attempts to apply other theories of justifications to conspiracy theories, such as reliabilism, which dispenses with the notion of evidence? Thanks.
Well, I mean, I gave some examples of non-doxastic. I mean, I think the idea is that there are lots of attitudes that are not properly defined as beliefs. Like faith is sometimes referred to as non-doxastic, but there are actually lots of cases of, like Robert Audi talks about propositional faith or faith as belief. So I think non-doxastic is what I'm saying is any attitude that maybe isn't a belief, like properly said to be a belief. And a belief is truth aiming. I mean, I think that's at least the way I'm defining belief. And I think that's at least my understanding is that pretty well accepted definition of belief is that a belief is something that aims at truth. So some of these non-doxastic views that don't aim at truth, well, I mean, that's what I'm saying. If they're non-doxastic if they're not aiming at truth. No, that's not quite right. I think you could have examples of like faith that are truth aiming, but not necessarily a belief, but that gets much more complicated. So I don't think I'm doing a good job answering this question. Anyway, moving on to your second question, you're right. Evidentialism is one theory of epistemic justification. So I would have to look at reliabilism or other forms of justification. Maybe I can find a way to incorporate that into what I'm doing right now, because I am clearly leaning heavily on sort of that evidentialist point of view. So thank you for your question.
So, Will, I have a quick question. Well, maybe it's probably not a quick question, but so what I get from your paper is that you're making the case that conspiracy theorists ought to embrace democratic norms if they want, if they really want to find out whether or not their conspiracy theories are true or not, they ought to embrace these democratic norms, because that's where they're going to find the answers, or creating a scenario where, you know, answers might actually be forthcoming. And I don't know, it's when I'm thinking about it tonight, I'm just trying to figure out, like, if you're right, then I wonder if I should just be despondent, because it requires being able to make the argument that you're making to others who, you know, if they're given a choice between authoritarianism, you know, they have the ability to just take control of society and you know, beat the truth out of people, as opposed to going the democratic route and you know, in some sense embracing their enemies and you know, hiring good lawyers for the people on that that hold views that are different from theirs. Yeah, just, it's like, how do you convince folks that you've got the right, you know, you've got a good argument, you know? It's, you know, yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's just kind of, I just feel kind of despondent that it's like, I get to see you on the steps of the Capitol building January 6th, trying to convince them, like, no, don't bust in and you know, carry out the big lie, or you know, or string up Pence. No, don't you see that if you step back and we, you know, bring about a democratic system, then you know, you'll get the answers to your questions. We'll find out about Pizzagate, and we'll find out about these things. I just don't know if they're going to buy it, or yeah.
Well, so I mean, what I'm saying here is really limited, right? Like, it's limited to conspiracy theorists who are interested in truth, not conspiracy theorists who are interested in political power. And so that's maybe dividing a person up in a way that might be difficult, because we're going to have to move to some other. I mean, if the challenge is that a lot of conspiracy theorists are using sort of non-doxastic, right? Like their feeling is that the government is broken, then and all they care about is not the truth, but just their own political position. My argument isn't aimed at them. I'm not saying that those people have an internal commitment to democracy. I'm only arguing that conspiracy theorists who are committed to truth are committed to democratic norms. So, you know, I totally admit it's not wide ranging. It doesn't include every conspiracy theorist. And, you know, I got reamed out by Lee Basham one time for claiming like a certain kind of amount of conspiracy theorists exists, and I won't do that again. So I don't know if most conspiracy theorists are truth aiming, or if most of them are interested in political power and personal feelings. So if the latter is true, then my approach is totally useless, right? If all conspiracy theories are political power and feelings, I'm just wrong. I'm useless, right? This doesn't do anything. But I do think that conspiracy theorists, a significant portion, are concerned with truth, and to get truth, I think you need democracy.
Thanks.
So sorry, that should leave you despondent. So I can fix that.
It's late, yes. But Em, it looks like there might be some questions.
Yeah. So I think being despondent should be a natural state, especially if you're living in the US these days anyway. I mean, if you're happy, you're not paying attention. With those grim words, so Steve has a question which actually does relate to a question I was going to ask, and I think is actually an extension of what Brian was asking. Steve goes, how global do conspiracy theories have to be a target of your critique? Consider a Trump supporter who thinks that elections are rigged in the US, but not in all countries, and wishes to see democracy restored in the US. Is this Trump supporter a target of yours?
Yeah, good question. I think that the problem is that the Trump supporters who are, or any, you know, conspiracy theorist that is really skeptical of the democratic system, I mean, they're still the beneficiary of it, right? I mean, they were able to come to what they think are true beliefs because they had the protection that democracy affords. January 6th happened because they had the freedom of association. It happened because they had the freedom to exchange, messages with one another on an open internet, right? So I think there's something kind of hypocritical about wanting to tear democracy down, even though you are the beneficiary of all these, right? Your position was arrived at after being the beneficiary of all the protections that the democracy you're saying, is corrupted is affording you. I mean, like, yeah, I agree. They want to restore democracy in like a certain sense of it, and not the entire thing, right? Like, they're not global skeptics, right? They're not saying all of society is corrupt. They're only claiming that one person was elected illegitimately, right? And that feeling that they have is what you'd call descriptive legitimacy, not normative legitimacy, right? Like, just because they don't feel like Biden's the real president doesn't mean that he wasn't elected in a proper way. But I mean, it's the same way that like neo-Nazis marching, right? I mean, they're not really neo-Nazis. Nazis kill people, they're fascists, right? But neo-Nazis marching under the banner of free association and, the First Amendment right to free speech. I mean, they're just playing Nazi. They're not actual Nazis, right? So, yeah, so I mean, there is this like double thing going on where the January 6th Trump supporters are claiming that democracy is corrupt, but at the same time, that democracy seemed to protect their ability to reach that conclusion in the first place. Once they move to violence, I think they've left the realm of deliberative democracy anyway. And most of what I'm concerned about is inequitous conspiracy theories. People that offer immoral concepts, immoral conspiracy theories, but once you've moved into violence, you've left my sort of circle of deliberative democracy, right? So hopefully that answered your question.
I suppose to push on that ever so slightly, I'm going to go back to ancient history for this. So famously, Athens voted its democracy out of existence when Sparta took control, and then famously decided they didn't actually like to be controlled by Sparta. So they voted their democracy back into existence. But for about 2 decades or so, the Athenian democracy was voted out of existence and then back in. And in some respects, that seems like a tool you can use. And conversely, I've known of libertarians back in Aotearoa, New Zealand, who are vehemently against the welfare state. They think it should be abolished, but they will make use of the welfare state whilst it exists, going, it's immoral, but I should use every leverage I've got within the state system. I just don't think this should exist going forward. And so you can go, well, these people are only playing Nazis because they're doing everything under constitutional democracy. But maybe they're going, well, look, I don't approve of this thing, but I'll use the protections I've got now so that they can be abolished and not used in future. It's only hypocrisy if you view it in a very particular lens.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I'm not totally going to answer this question right, but it seems to me like one of the challenges here is like, what if we use democracy to like get the fascist authoritarian state that we really want, right? We use all the resources of democracy and then ultimately get an undemocratic outcome. But I mean, I think yeah, that's sure. I suppose that's possible, but once you're in that authoritarian system, now you've lost all of the benefits, right, that you had before. And so you can no longer believe that your beliefs are true, right? Like if you're committed to the truth of conspiracy theories, like you will no longer be able to inquire into that truth once you've gotten your authoritarian state. Because even if you get rid of all the people you want, the problem is you need those detractors to be able to question your views so that you can mold and respond to them and create your own personal views that you can consider to be true. So, and did that answer the challenge that you were providing?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's one of those tricky situations where it depends on a whole bunch of perspectives and assumptions as to how you think political action should work. And I think that's one answer you can give. But let's move on to Charles, our final question from Charles. The Czech and Slovak central thesis boils down to this. It is legitimate for the state to suppress conspiracy theories if these theories can be weaponized in a way that threatens the rights to freedom and equality of some citizens. Now imagine that the author's principle has been accepted in some state, let's say the US. We have a government-appointed federal commission theories agencies whose job it is to monitor conspiracy theories with a view to determining whether they were sufficiently inimical to the rights to freedom and equality of a significantly large group of citizens to warrant suppression. Perhaps this would not be too bad if the FCTA remained in the hands of good, thinkful liberals, such as the authors, which is obviously what they are imagining. But what if it did not? The criterion is so vague and so subjective that virtually any conspiracy theory, true or false, sensible or silly, could be condemned or excused as either meeting or failing to meet this criterion.
Okay, I'm trying to digest this. Hold on one second.
Right, it is a big point.
You know, geez, I'm sorry. I'm just having a hard time figuring out what the question is asking. I mean, I think part of the challenge that I'm having here is that I'm engaging in sort of like an ideal theory, right? Like I'm talking about like an ideal conception of democracy, not completely ideal, like, you know, really idealized citizens, but to at least some extent. And so I'm working within like more of a theoretical realm. And so, I mean, the point that I think I'm trying to make here is that that these sorts of decisions about what counts as a conspiracy theory that that should be sort of, I guess, allowed in or not allowed in is really more up to the democratic process and not up to you know, a small group in the government. So I'm again, really, I apologize. I'm really not answering the question correctly. I'm just having a little bit of a tough time figuring out what it's asking me.
Which is fair enough. It is quite late where you are anyway. We should probably bring this particular session to a close. We have a brief 10-minute